Hello, my name is Jake, live streams, and we're trying to find the best time in order to do this. Internet connections here in Mongolia are very weak and unreliable, so this is still a learning process for myself. So I ask that you bear with us as we go through this process. Well, over the last few that subject in detail with the students, and I really enjoy bringing up the topic. Why are burials in the ancient world so important? Well, they tell us a lot about a culture, and they give us a lot of information about the social status of the people, the development of the economy. They can help us understand warfare during only a matter of 3 or 4 feet. The body was buried with grave goods. Now, they are what tells us the most about structure, help for disturbances caused by hunting indications of why somebody died. Burial mounds at Tel Brak, in which we see frequent custom to the alkalinity and the gender of graves and age, and defining those, and is best when we find infant graves, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the type of grave goods that we typically find is pottery. Typically one single or knives, these types of objects, but for the typical individual, it was in very poor, more into the and have found particular objects like the bowl of the ram and the opened up. Some with tablets and into the ground of a room of the Sumerian house. We're not exactly sure why it was put in the corner of the house. It could be for various reasons, and so that is something that is still being worked on. But obviously, the family wanted to stay connected. We see in Nippur that there were some occurrences where the body was actually placed under the threshold of the door, either inside or immediately outside. So the occupants of the house would pass over that infant burial at the time that they entered or exited the house. I'm not exactly sure how that got started. I can't. It's one of those moments where it's like, honey, I have an idea of where we can put our dead child. Uh, it's it's definitely a remarkable development, and we can observe that in circumstances these infants were buried in multiple layers. So you have a child at the very lowest layer, and then you have maybe up to 3 successive layers on top of that of children. And so it was a very different style of burial. Now, also in Nippur and at Tel Brak, we see burials that are represent infant burials, which are placed at the corners of the temples. So they have also found them at the corners of the ziggurat. So to have an infant burial at the corner may have also had a religious implication that we're not unaware of. And there's no information as to whether these children were buried whole or whether they were buried, or what I should say is this: were they buried after being sacrificed, or were they buried as a result of natural death and placed there for that purpose? There's not any information at this time, but that was certainly one more development in the style of burial. And one of the next and last developments that we have in the style of burial is that during would be placed inside. And so the Kassites made note that they encountered spirits, they encountered lost loved ones. And so we have our first written reports of ghosts in a home. You know, somebody walks around the corner or somebody walks into the home and there's your departed loved one. So take that for what you will. Knowing that it's just a few days away, a couple days away from Halloween, I guess we can take that as somewhat scary information that you come home and see your departed loved one. But you know, Americans and Westerners have the tradition of placing the dead in cemeteries, and obviously we understand and know that, you know, in some vague way, cemeteries tend to hold what appear to be spirits, and so it would only seem natural that if you are going to bury this person in this place, that that might be an occurrence. Again, you know, taking that for a logical extension, we can explore the idea of having the infant burial. As far as I'm aware, has been reported or recorded about seeing an infant in the home. That may have been one of the motivations. That may have been a springboard for this continuing and spreading as a culture and as a society, because this is something that we see on a frequent basis. This is not an individual or isolated occurrence. And so something had to have been operating within the society to say that this was an appropriate and even desired course for burial and keeping one's loved ones nearby. So we have the Sumerian. Now, one thing that I think that I mentioned at the top of this was that the Sumerian burials typically were rectangle in shape. And that is a very important detail, believe it or not, creation and a very distinctive variation on that. And that is that we see oval pits. Not rectangle pits, but oval pits. And so having an oval pit certainly represents some type of different cultural perception at work. Now, the bodies are similarly placed on their side, facing a cardinal direction, and also tend to rotate facing north, east, west, south. And again, nothing has really been thoroughly documented as to why not only it was on the side, whether left or right, but also why it was facing a certain direction. Some people and some theories that have been proposed that I have heard have been that it's to represent feel, you know, the fact that it was positioned to look towards a religious temple or no place. All of these could be correct, or none of these ideas could be correct. We just simply don't have enough information to go on. And one of the interesting things about the Naquadah, these are the Naquadah burials I'm talking about, is that they show the most remarkable amount of variation and development, especially for an ancient culture. We also have 15,000 examples of Naquadah period burials. And in that 15,000, we also see social differentiation. Unlike in Mesopotamian graves, we really cannot see any changes in social status or social class. And one of those Differences, of course, is that we have some bodies that are placed in a separate location, and not only are they in a separate location, but they also show a higher degree and higher quality of grave goods. So we have not just one piece of pottery or pot, but we have several pots. There might be coins, there might be daggers, there might be other types of grave goods present and in greater abundance, or as I said, greater quality. So we're starting to see two levels of social stratification. One, that the burial sites are separated between common and elites, and also we're beginning to see more ostentatious displays of wealth, even in death. And the idea that, hey, I'm taking it with me when I die. And again, this also reflects the common perception that life after death was going to be just a simple continuation of what was already happening in one's life, and that there was a necessity to take food or the ability to carry water or to have daggers or knives or prepare for any danger or contingency. Basically, death was moving day. You're just moving from one life to another. Now, in the Naquata burials, we also see a large difference in the not just grave goods, but really also the protection of the body. They start getting wrapped in weave or woven baskets, and so these baskets contain the body. Now, the body is still naked. Even in Mesopotamia, the body was placed in naked, but now we have greater ability for the body to be protected from the elements. There's now greater evidence of gender. We can also tell the differences in a body that was placed in there, probably death by natural causes, and a body that suffered damage from combat. So this is one of the key advancements with this basket weaving technology. But I think in addition, it was a very practical step to protect the grave goods and to protect the body from later mutilation or, robbery, grave robbery. Grave robbery continued to be a significant problem and was even worked into the design of the mastaba building or the bench building, because even though the mastaba had doors, they were actually false doors, false entrances and exits that might fool a robber. Possibly it was meant for the body to enter and exit, but again, it was the mastaba was totally 100% sealed off, and its greater ability to protect the body and to keep those goods isolated from the greater population is very important. And I've just kind of leapt a few thousand years into the development to go from a simple pit burial to now a bricked building that's long, fairly squat, and flat on top. And even these show a remarkable amount of development, because initially they were just on a single level, and you would have a very simple chapel type element on one end. You'd have the body on a bench, and you would have the grave goods. And then later on, what we see is the development of the body actually being lowered into a pit below the main floor of the mastaba, and actually a more elaborate chapel, and I guess if you would say a funerary complex, where you also now have the body moved down, the chapel, and the grave goods. So they were taking a lot of steps and a lot of care to preserve the longevity of the body, longevity of the sacredness of the grave goods, and also ensure that the body would be protected from exterior forces, because this was an actual structure. This was actual burial underground in a chamber which you could access. And this is an important development and a step along the way to the pyramid. Now, the mastabas and the pyramids would exist co-equally for up until, I believe, at least the 12th dynasty. And that is just simply because the pyramids were designed for the pharaohs, for the kings, and the mastabas were for everybody else. And they did. The mastabas were organized in what we call necropolises, necro being the Greek word for death, and also polis, obviously, city, so death city, city of the dead. So we had that development, but we can definitely trace this idea of the chapel and the burial chamber, and we can see as it kind of goes in an inverse direction in the pyramids. So whereas everybody else, the common people, were going down, the pharaohs were actually going up. So inside the pyramids, the burial chamber would actually sometimes be around the midpoint of the pyramids, which is a remarkable development. And this is something that a lot of my students kind of struggled with, and they're like, well, this definitely shows that in this world and in that period, there was a real neglect of and not commonality, the idea of the common man and not having social distinctions or hierarchy. Now, we still have those that exist, certain historical figures or individuals and great leaders of state have obviously more elaborate tombs or graves than many other people. Jim Morrison's grave comes immediately to my mind, but even people like presidents like John F. Kennedy, Vladimir Lenin, and so on and so forth. These people have made a major mark in history and so have a larger grave. I was in Abu Dhabi in 2015 at the Grand Mosque there in Abu Dhabi, and we stood outside of a very elaborate sepulcher for, and I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the more prominent founders and sheikhs of the Abu Dhabi sheikhdom. So, yeah. Well, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this examination of burial pits. Wednesday or Thursday, I will be covering Mycenaean burials, and I will actually be using a large number of slides and other information. Now, as you can see here, there is down there a chat box and a feature, and I hope that as you log in and as you watch, that you will connect with me as I'm talking, ask me questions. Sometimes you may see me pause. I don't know if the live stream is continuing at that point. One time when it appeared to be going. But on the recorded portion, those moments were lost. And so there were sometimes as much as a 2 or 3 minute gap between my comments. And so it may not have made a lot of sense. So I look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to having more people join me on these live streams. And we will work through all these things together and produce a wonderful program. Thank you for your attention. Have a wonderful day.